controls and maintains the largest stockpile of chemical weapons. We are certain that the Syrian regime has used part of his stockpile against his own people. Thanks to our services and intelligence, we've confirmed what gas was used, what toxic elements were used, and these elements have been transferred to the United Nations. We're certain that this attack took place as part of an effort to retake a key area, the strategic area held by the opposition. After this attack, we are also certain that intense bombardments have been taken place to wipe out any trace of this chemical attack. We're sure that the Syrian opposition or any other group involved in the insurrection has the capacity or the means or the resources to wage such an attack. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, it's therefore without any doubt that there's been an enormous chemical attack for which the Syrian regime bears the entire responsibility for. It is certain, and we've shared this information with our American and British, German, Turkish, even the Arab League has confirmed during its meeting last Sunday and blamed the Syrian regime.
La recherche de cette responsabilité n'entre pas dans la mission des enquêteurs des Nations Unies, comme vous le savez.
It's not the job of the United Nations to find out who was behind this attack, as you well know, but they have confirmed that chemical weapons were indeed used. In the face of this, what shall we do? React or resign ourselves to doing nothing? The international community has already been engaged in talks for a long time to find a diplomatic solution. But the President of the Republic has called for a clear response. In effect, we were the first to recognize, France was the first country to recognize the Syrian National Council, the opposition, to promote a political solution without any hesitation. We've always looked for a solution to this crisis, whether we've had to talk to Russia, China, or other countries in the region. But there is no way that this act can go unpunished. Bashar al-Assad must pay for his crimes, because if not, chemical weapons could be used again in Damascus and Aleppo, and perhaps on an even wider scale. And to not act would be to put in danger peace and security for the entire region. And beyond that, our own safety and security. Because after all, if we fail to act now, what message are we sending to the rest of the international community? What message are we sending to other regimes? And of course, like you, I'm thinking of Korea, North Korea, and Iran. Ladies and gentlemen, it's clear that the message will be that if you possess these arms, these weapons, you can act without impunity, with impunity.
Oui, mesdames et messieurs les députés,
Ladies and gentlemen,
la solution à la crise syrienne sera politique.
the answer to the Syrian crisis will be political and not military. But we cannot hide from the reality of today, because if we fail to strike now militarily, there will be no political solution. The dictatorship of Bashar al-Assad cannot be made to feel it can act with impunity. I repeat, it is trying to liquidate its opposition by terror and by death. The President of the Republic, French President François Hollande, is clear on this. We need collective action, legitimate action, because the Syrian regime has violated its international obligations. Bashar al-Assad has violated his obligations of 1925 that the United Nations ratified by waging an indiscriminate act like that. He has broken various Geneva Conventions. He has committed what the Secretary General of the United Nations has himself qualified as a crime against humanity. And what's more, the Syrian regime has constantly refused to act with the international community and the International Human Rights Council. He has dismissed any attempt to hold a ceasefire. Of course, and any authorization from the National Security Council would be highly desirable. However, we cannot hide from the reality that's facing us, because over the last 2.5 years, Russia and China have blocked any attempt to impose a resolution, and on 3 occasions have they used their veto. The last attempt to launch a resolution after this attack was stopped as clearly. So, in the face of this latest chemical attack, the action facing us is clear. Well, we will act collectively and with thought. It must be a firm action, a clean, limited strike. There's no question of there being any troops on the ground. There is no question of any military action being taken place to reinforce the opposition. But of course, we do desire the departure of President Bashar al-Assad, who threatens France and who even believes that he can intimidate his population. And yes, we do desire his departure, his exit, and France will work towards this. Our message is clear. The use of chemical weapons is unacceptable. On the one hand, we want to punish him for this, as well as warn others that this type of action cannot go unpunished. Some have said that such a military strike will further complicate the situation. But I appeal to you that any further instability in this region which now has, as estimated, led to some 2 million people fleeing the country. Surely this a limited strike will not worsen things. We also have to be loyal to our own principles, the principles which France tries to promote around the world. France has a responsibility, and the principles that we uphold have led to this country being a great country. And this is the reason why, ladies and gentlemen, that we must remain united for France in the face of this. But I repeat that France will never act alone. It will act with other partners, starting with the United States, the country with which it's always stood shoulder to shoulder with in critical moments when the cause has been just. And we count also on the support of other European nations and countries in the regions and other countries in the Arab League nations in order to build the largest possible coalition, and the G20 meeting, which starts tomorrow in St. Petersburg, will be an occasion to gather further support. Ladies and gentlemen, next year we will commemorate the start of the First World War, a war which will go down in history as being the war in which chemical weapons were used widespreadly. But we cannot accept a move back to that 100 years later. That is our responsibility here, and that is why France must act. In these serious circumstances, it's important that France be enlightened. That's why I intend to inform you in the next few days over the evolution of this situation.
La décision ultime ne pourra être prise par le président de la République que lorsque sera constituée la coalition.
This coalition must exist in order for us to take action. In the face of such barbarity, passivity is not an option, not for France in any case. To not react, to let Bashar al-Assad to continue his atrocities, to continue using weapons of mass destruction and chemical weapons, and to destroy the country, and to continue threatening his partners. France will assume all its responsibilities. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you very much. So just a reminder, if you're just joining us here on Euronews, that was the French Prime Minister Jean-Marc Ayrault starting this debate, this much-awaited debate in France in the National Assembly over whether France should take military action. Now, Christian Jacob from the opposition, the UMP, is now about to address the House.
Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le Premier ministre, mes chers collègues,
Mr. President, dear colleagues, on the 21st of August, chemical weapons were used in Syria. We condemn this savage barbaric act. On the 27th of August, the President of the Republic said France was ready to intervene in Syria. 8 days later. So you will agree that François Hollande, your government and France are in a diplomatic and military deadlock. Mr. Prime Minister, you should recall your speech from the 22nd of March 2011. France, under the leadership of President Sarkozy, was intervening in the over the Libyan skies. And I'm sure you carefully measured your words, but you said that the objectives, the means used, and the organization of the Allies must not be done without a UN mandate, without any legitimacy. Without such legitimacy, any initiative would go against the people waging that action. These were your words, Mr. Prime Minister. Well, France at that time was intervening with its allies without a UN mandate. But today, where are our allies? Where is the UN resolution? Mr. Prime Minister, why have you changed your mind? That would not be so serious if this amnesia was relaying the President's policy. The President, who likes to often remind us, who often very much likes to remind us of the actions of President Chirac. Why did he not take any initiative or take a bilateral action with our Russian friends or a European initiative that could have called for a European Council meeting to avoid France's isolation within the EU? Can France really, without any European allies, go headfirst into such a mission? We think, no, it can't.
Au-delà des majorités politiques,
beyond political majorities, beyond the President of the Republic,
la constance de notre politique étrangère a su rassembler les Français. Cette permanence a permis à la France d'être écoutée sur la
foreign policy
et d'avoir une voix qui porte et d'être aux yeux du monde.
Allowed France to be heard on the international stage. Jacques Chirac in 2003, when everyone was pushing for a war in Iraq, had he managed to stand up and put forward that putting force before right would be a big responsibility. But the decisions of François Hollande seem to be doing just that, and putting everything at risk. This is a very tormented region, and the voice of France needs to be faithful to its principles, as well as its past behavior. France has to be an ally of the United States, but not necessarily follow it blindingly into such action. Unfortunately, we only have an hour and a half to talk about this. British members of Parliament had 11 hours to talk about this. And your commitment to support Washington is surreal, absolutely surreal. When you criticized our presence in Afghanistan, You accused us,
En 2008,
Prime Minister,
en 2008, nous étions
of
simplement fidèles à la décision
having soldiers before
de Lyon.
anyone was asking.
En Afghanistan,
In Afghanistan,
l'action de la France
the action, France's action
que confère
was legitimate
des Nations Unies
because we had a United Nations resolution.
permanente du Conseil de sécurité. La France
Permanent members,
à attendre le vote
non-permanent members,
des bras croisés.
all were involved. We didn't wait with our arms folded.
Comprenez-nous bien, Monsieur le Premier ministre,
Understand us well, Mr. Prime Minister. If there is no United Nations mandate,
prendre une telle
the
décision
President of the Republic
Parlement
cannot
annonce.
take such a decision without Parliament's
Le 35
approval.
ne l'y oblige pas. Mais
Article 35
la Constitution
makes it extremely clear.
a voulu
The Constitution
engager la responsabilité de
also
votre gouvernement. C'est
asks
la
you
décision
to
que François Mitterrand avait prise en 1991.
request the permission of Parliament before such an act.
Ignorer que ce débat
We cannot ignore that this
est
debate
institutionnel.
poses a serious constitutional question. And we seem to have just lost our link there to the National Assembly. Now it's back. Unfortunately, for just joining us, we're not receiving any audio from Paris. So I can just tell you briefly, I can resume what Christian Jacob has been saying, and he's back here now, where he's been strongly criticizing the president as well as the Prime Minister's stance that France must intervene in Syria as part of a coalition. This debate has the opposition leader, Christian Jacob, has been pointing out, apparently is only going to continue for an hour, perhaps an hour and a half, compared to Britain's House of Parliament, which debated this for some 11 hours. Earlier on, perhaps you would have seen President Obama make a strong case for action, military action in Syria. We'll be bringing you a roundup of what he said, as well as some of this continuing debate in our later bulletins. Stay with us for more of today's top stories.
US President Obama is in the Swedish capital Stockholm for 24 hours. His discussions there are focusing on climate change, trade and technology. But at a press conference with Swedish Prime Minister Fredrik Reinfeldt, Obama was asked about his determination to carry out military strikes in Syria.
You can always find a reason not to act. This is a complicated, difficult situation. And an initial response will not solve the underlying tragedy of the civil war in Syria. As Frederick mentioned, that will be solved through eventually a political transition. But we can send a very clear, strong message against the prohibition